In 2022, to handle the concept of mathematical intelligence, HI developed the concepts of mathematical artificial neural nets, MANN, which complement the concepts of artificial neural networks, ANN. Artificial neural nets and mathematical artificial neural nets. In 1943, Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts created the concept of artificial neural networks. They published the paper, A Logical Calculus of the Ideas Immanent in Nervous Activity. McCulloch and Pitts tried to understand how the brain could produce highly complex patterns, by using many basic cells that are connected. They designed their system based on as they believed our brains work, and patterned it after the biological model of how neurons work with each other. The neural networks were growing, and in practice they took the name of artificial intelligence, displacing other methodologies and technologies that also generate artificial intelligence in the machines. Traditional artificial intelligence, based on artificial neural nets, ANN, and support vector machines, SVM, has concentrated its efforts on imitating the mental models of human beings in the recognition of patterns. Modeling efforts, coupled with today's great computational power, have enabled a great development in pattern recognition, definitively surpassing the human capacity for such activity. However, being a mental intelligence older than mathematics and creative, which has grown in the human being based on elements other than science, closer to empirical evidence, these characteristics are transferred to the scientific process of creating an artificial intelligence oriented to mental intelligence. Because of this, its growth has been slower than it would have been, if we had a scientific basis for mental intelligence. Within a nervous system, a neuron is an electrically excitable cell that fires electrical signals called action potentials through a neural network. The neuron is the main component of nervous tissue in all animals. Neurons communicate with other cells through synapses, specialized connections that commonly use minute amounts of chemical neurotransmitters, to pass the electrical signal from the presynaptic neuron to the target cell, across the synaptic gap. Neurons are highly specialized for the processing and transmission of cellular signals. Given their diversity of functions performed in different parts of the nervous system, there is a wide variety in their shape, size, and electrochemical properties. For instance, the soma of a neuron can vary from 4 to 100 micrometers in diameter. An artificial neuron is a mathematical function conceived as a model of biological neurons. Artificial neurons are elementary units in an artificial neural network. The artificial neuron receives one or more inputs, representing excitatory postsynaptic potentials and inhibitory postsynaptic potentials at neural dendrites, and sums them to produce an output, or activation, representing a neuron's action potential which is transmitted along its axon. Usually each input is separately weighted, and the sum is passed through a nonlinear function known as an activation function, or transfer function. The transfer functions usually have a sigmoid shape, but they may also take the form of other nonlinear functions, piecewise linear functions, or step functions. They are also often monotonically increasing, continuous, differentiable, and bounded. An artificial neural net is based on a collection of connected artificial neurons, which loosely model the neurons of a biological brain. Each connection, like the synapses in a biological brain, can transmit a signal to other neurons. An artificial neuron receives signals, then processes them, and can send to neurons connected to it. The signal at a connection is a real number, and the output of each neuron is computed by some nonlinear function of the sum of its inputs. The connections are called edges. Neurons and edges typically have a weight that adjusts as learning proceeds. The weight increases or decreases the strength of the signal at a connection. Neurons may have a threshold such that a signal is sent only if the aggregate signal crosses the threshold. Defining parameters and topology is a combination of empirical work and scientific work, but there is no mathematical theory that must be respected. The algorithmic process is cyclical, and its convergence is based on the minimization of errors. An artificial neuron. Starting from the perceptron, the first artificial neuron created, the knowledge of neuronal modeling has evolved, currently having multiple types of artificial neural nets, specialized in performing specific pattern recognition. For this, the basic patterns of ANNs are modified. For example, the Convolutional artificial neural nets. They correspond to MANN specialized in identifying certain types of patterns, such as images. The image presents an example of an MANN oriented to recognize images of numbers written freehand. The result is a discrete indicator associated to the number read. Starting from the traditional artificial neuron, to build artificial brains, HI has created a new type of neuron. This new type of neuron will be called mathematical artificial neuron. Its name was derived from the fact that the neuron is built, based on mathematical models that represent a system, and that it does contains logical or intuitive elements. The mathematical artificial neuron is a mathematical model, presumably of optimization, which results from the partitioning and decomposition of a monolithic problem into an atomized model, following the mathematical laws of large-scale mathematical modeling. Two mathematical artificial neurons communicate with each other, forming a network of mathematical artificial neurons. Communication occurs in two directions between the two neurons. The communication protocol between the two neurons is defined by mathematical laws developed to solve atomized problems. The modeler can choose the protocol, but not the communication process, which for optimization is based on the scientific laws of duality theory, and for equilibrium problems in mathematical programming with equilibrium constraints, PEC, methodologies. A mathematical neuron represents a robot, which can communicate with another robot, autonomously, since it knows the mathematical rules that it must respect. This is what happens in the human brain, where autonomic systems communicate with each other to make decisions. The mathematical artificial neuron is the technological evolution from the biological neuron, typical of mental intelligence, to the neurons necessary to represent mathematical intelligence, which until now are not produced by the human being. Like all mathematics, theory is cadent, and for those of us who already work in high-complexity mathematical modeling, it is the logical step we must take. It's just widening the look, and thinking a little outside the box. The mathematical artificial neuron is a mathematical superstructure, representing a complete system. A mathematical artificial neuron network can be a neuron of a larger mathematical artificial neuron network. This law of transitivity is typical of large-scale modeling. This process can be repeated, until the smallest mathematical artificial neurons, the atoms of the system, are obtained. A large-scale system can be represented by a mathematical artificial neuron, and covers multiple subsystems, where each of them can be represented by a mathematical artificial neuron. Using large-scale methodologies, the mathematical artificial neuron can be divided into two, or more, mathematical artificial neurons, forming a mathematical network of artificial neurons. This process can be repeated, until the smallest mathematical artificial neurons, the atoms of the system, are obtained. The diagram presents the hierarchical structure of decomposition and partition of an oil and gas company. The structure presented is similar to that of the cerebral cortex, and based on mathematical artificial neurons, any system can be represented, in a similar way to large-scale optimization models. This representation is made based on a network of mathematical artificial neurons, and could be further divided until it reaches the atoms of the system, indivisible mathematical artificial neurons. An artificial hypothalamus is a network of mathematical artificial neurons. Each of them represents a system or subsystem. The difference with large-scale methodologies is that the solution is visualized as specialized communications between mathematical problems, while in the artificial hypothalamus the process is cooperative based on autonomy, distributed, and real-time processing. In addition, there is a standardized language for communications between mathematical artificial neurons. Any type of organization can be represented following these principles. The case of a poultry production system is presented. The system has been divided into 6 subsystems, which together make up the poultry production system. The great contribution of mathematical artificial neuron networks is that they open the way to integrate machine learning operations with the management of mathematical programming models, using 2 standardized paradigms. For example, following the principles developed by Benders, it is possible to build an artificial hippocampus that remain active and useful, beyond the duration of a run of a computer model. To do this, the cuts generated in each run must be stored in such a way as that they may be used later. This implies a coordination work, since it cannot be guaranteed that the information as it is produced can be reprocessed later. For this reason, it is considered necessary to develop tools, based on traditional artificial intelligence, artificial neural nets, to help the management of the hippocampus database. The idea is that for very large problems, the selection process will include an ANN. For example, it is possible to use convolutional neural networks to select the arrays that will bring the best ones for a hot startup process. This is one of Hai's research projects. Velasquez, in 2021, published on SSRN, the paper Artificial Hypothalamus, Artificial Intelligence and Mathematical Programming Integration, in which the foundations of artificial brains, and more specifically of the hypothalamus, are laid. The article, and others later, carefully studies the relationships between the structures of the neocortex, with those formed when a mathematical problem is atomized, to use large-scale optimization methodologies, oriented to the partitioning and decomposition of systems, and they define the artificial brain in semi-detail. This is a disruptive vision of artificial intelligence, considering the power of computers, the evolution of mathematics, and the Internet of Things. This conference explains in a summarized way this evolution, based on the current state of AI. A complementary document is Artificial Brains, Augmented Artificial Intelligence, Artificial Neocortex plus Artificial Hypothalamus plus Artificial Hippocampus. Alice, Which Way I Ought to Go. The Cheshire Cat. It doesn't much matter which way you go, if only you walk long enough. Thank you for your attention.